This short video provides an introduction to report writing. Let's start out at the beginning of the report. First up, you should include a title page, which will include the title of the report and your name. On the next page, you should include an executive summary. Now, an executive summary is something that students struggle with, and I think the best way to think about what goes into one is to think about the fact that this is a summary for a busy executive. You need to provide enough information in the executive summary that someone could read it and have a broad understanding of the report content. Executive summaries are meant to allow readers to skip reading the report in its entirety. To that end, you should include a complete summary of your report, including a summary of your findings and recommendations. Following the executive summary, include a table of contents that lists out all of the sections within your report and indicates a page number for them. After the table of contents, the report begins. The first major section is the introduction. This section is designed to introduce the research, the project, the problem, or the topic. Use a structured introduction with standard subheadings. A typical approach is to start out with a broad introductory paragraph. Then include a purpose subsection, which is where you'll provide an overview of the purpose of the document. Note that this isn't an overview of the related project or investigation, but an overview of the purpose of the document itself. Next, you'll have a scope section that outlines what is in and out of scope within the report, what you will and won't be covering. You might have a key terms section in your report, where you define any of the key terms that you'll be using throughout the report. Try to develop your own definition of these terms, rather than quoting definitions, with supporting references from relevant sources. Sometimes it might be appropriate to include a key information sources section. If you're drawing heavily from a few information sources in your document, it's good to outline up front what those key information sources are and how you'll be using them. This section isn't strictly necessary though. Finally, provide background information including, if relevant, any context. For example, if you are writing a report about an organisation, include information about the organisation. For a research or project report, you also include subsections that provide background to the problem, the rationale, research objectives, and so forth, or in the case of a project, the project purpose and objectives. Like the introduction, the structure of the body of a report varies depending on what kind of report it is and who your audience is. Let's start by talking about research reports, because they tend to be more fixed in their structure. In a research report, you'd typically see sections like method, literature review, findings, and discussion. When you're writing a professional report, like a report for management, there are some elements of the report structure that are fairly standard, but there are some that vary. In many ways, the major sections I've listed here for a research report apply, at least in terms of the nature of the sections that you include in a professional report. After the introduction, the first major section generally outlines the approach taken to whatever is being reported on. For example, if the report is an environmental scan, there will be a section outlining how the scan was conducted. A project report would provide an overview of how the project was conducted. Sometimes there may be a literature review in a professional report, but it's much more common for the literature to be integrated into other sections of the report. The next major section focuses on the findings. In a briefing report to management, this is where you would present information about the topic and analyse the related issues in turn. In a report on a project, this is where you would report on the outcomes. In a report that provides a briefing to management, this is where you would examine the issues and topics related to the briefing. Although it is analytical, this section tends to focus on topics and issues as discrete entities, with introductory and concluding statements that tie them together, but it doesn't so much provide an overarching analysis of how the issues relate to each other. The final section in the body is another analytical section that pulls together information from earlier sections of the report and ties it to the findings. This is often called a discussion section. Where there is a literature review, the findings may be presented here in context of the literature. In other types of reports, this section will provide another layer of analysis, a combined analysis of the issues examined in the findings section. It takes the analysis a step further and looks at the implications for what has been discussed in the findings. Just a note here that in a project report, you will often have a section focused on evaluation at the end of the body of the report. This is typically an evaluation against project objectives, but may also include a write-up of a more formal evaluation strategy. And that's it for the body of the report. Just as there are conventions for how to start a report, there are also conventions for how to finish it off. First, include a conclusion section. It's important that your conclusions are meaningful. This is a place where you pick up all the threads of your analysis, all of your arguments, and tie them together into a neat package. Don't just state what you have already said in the report. That's more suited to an executive summary. The point of a conclusion is to provide a full stop for your reader. It allows the reader to feel like they've actually made it to the end and that they understand what you have talked about in the report. Your conclusion should be grounded in the analysis in your report, so there shouldn't be any surprises here as you're pulling together those threads you've already created. Don't introduce any new material. Conclusions aren't about starting new threads. They're about picking up the existing ones and pulling them together. Most importantly, make sure you don't run out of steam. Leave yourself time and energy to write a solid conclusion at the end of your report writing. Following on from your conclusion section, you'll include a recommendation section. This is where you recommend actions based on the analysis in your report. Your recommendations should be concise but detailed. Break large recommendations into component parts. They must be meaningful and they must be actionable. They must also be grounded in your analysis. So again, there shouldn't be any surprises in your recommendation section. It should clearly pick up on your analysis. Perhaps the most important guideline for recommendations is that they must be actionable. So the statements in your recommendations should be things that people can actually take action on and do. Next is your reference list. If you're preparing a report for me, choose your preferred format and stick to it consistently. In other units, check with your lecturer to make sure they don't have a format they prefer you to use. The QUT SiteWrite tool is useful for providing examples of how to reference different types of material. Finally, you may have appendices, which is where you'll include any supplementary information that you've referred to in text, but which is too long, not important enough, or not appropriate to put in the body of the report. Appendices aren't mandatory. If you do have them, you must make sure that you refer to them at an appropriate place in the text of your report, and they should add value to your report. Otherwise, there isn't really any point in having them. In the first semester of study, we provide you really scaffolded information about your assignments, including an overview of how you should organise the content in them. If you're not sure how to structure the body of your report or any assessment piece, then you should have a chat to your lecturer who'll be able to provide you with that information. While this video has provided a general introduction to how to write a report, particular types of reports have particular conventions. So if you need any help, just ask your lecturer. Finally, a few conventions that go hand in hand with report writing. First of all, I recommend that you always number your headings in a report and use different heading styles. This allows your reader to feel oriented, to understand where they are within the report and how the content elements relate to each other. So use numbers and format your headings differently, depending on the different level of heading. Feel free to use bullet points. You can't write your entire report in bullet points, but this isn't essay writing, and bullet points are allowable. If you're making lists of items, then you should do it with bullet points, not in a paragraph. You should also use tables where it's appropriate, and charts, but make sure you refer to these tables and charts in the text surrounding them, and that you number and name your tables and charts as well. Tables and charts are useful for relaying information, but you must go one step further and provide some analysis of them in the text that surrounds them. Finally, it's conventional to write reports in the third person, and you should avoid referring to yourself or a group of people who are authoring the report. So rather than saying, "In this report I will," you simply say, "This report will." Just a note also about what is excluded and included in word counts in reports. When you're writing a report for me, the executive summary isn't included in the word count because it's a repeat of content that's in the report itself. Tables that don't have a lot of text, so for example, tables that are primarily numerical or tick boxes, generally don't count towards your word limit, but lengthy tables or tables that are full of paragraphs of text will. Your reference list also is excluded from the word count, although for practical reasons, the in-text references will be included. This video has provided a general introduction to report writing, but it has covered a lot of ground fairly quickly. If you have any questions, it's best to address them to your lecturer in the unit that you're preparing your report for. However, I'm always happy to discuss writing conventions if you need some help.